From the driver's seat, Marcus said, "Come on, Rebecca. We are not stopping again until we get there," his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I felt the same knot of fear tighten in my gut as I sat in the back of his pickup truck, between his brothers, Nathan and Austin. We still had hours remaining on our road trip to Las Vegas, which I had never intended to do in the first place, and the desert heat was already intolerable at 9 a.m. The name Rebecca Torres is mine. I have been married to Marcus Collins for 3 years, and I am 33 years old. Slowly, what had begun as a loving partnership had become to something I hardly recognized. In order to provide for our family, I had put my MBA studies on hold while Marcus worked as a junior accountant at a small business in Phoenix, Arizona. Austin and Nathan, his brothers, were regular guests at our house, and the three of them had a vicious sense of humor that always seemed to choose me as the focus of the joke. Austin added, "Really, Rebecca, you have the bladder of a toddler," and gave me a hard elbow to the ribs. "Maybe you should wear diapers next time we go somewhere." On the other side of me, Nathan started laughing. In fact, that would be funny. Can you imagine? Despite the embarrassment burning in my cheeks, I made myself keep quiet. I knew from experience that protecting yourself simply made their attacks worse. I briefly hoped Marcus, who caught my look in the rearview mirror, would warn his brothers to back off. Rather, he simply grinned and turned up the radio. I bounced uneasily between the two men who appeared to enjoy making the trip as unpleasant as possible for me once the truck struck a particularly bumpy section of roadway. Nathan extended his legs wide, pushing me into an even more constrained area, and Austin unintentionally elbowed me again, harder this time. They both pretended that I was being rude when I attempted to change my stance. I pointed to the sign that read Barstow Rest Area 2 miles and added, "Look, there's a rest stop coming up. Will you kindly let us stop?" I could actually extend my legs and use the restroom. Something icy flared over Marcus' features as we locked eyes in the mirror. He answered slowly, "Fine," with an odd smile teasing the edges of his mouth. "We're going to pause at Barstow. You are free to take as much time as you require." The interaction between Nathan and Austin made my skin crawl, but I was too happy about getting out of the truck to really notice. I had no clue that the most terrible and ultimately life-changing day of my life would be sparked by this innocuous request. The rest area resembled a mirage in the desert, a little concrete and shaded haven encircled by seemingly endless expanses of arid terrain. I was struck by how remote the location was when Marcus drew into the parking lot. The closest town appeared to be miles away in all directions, and there were only 2 other cars parked in the lot. The faraway mountains appeared to be dancing as waves of heat shimmered off the asphalt. I responded, "Thank you," as I got out of the vehicle, relieved to be free of the stuffy atmosphere. I paused to stretch my legs, which were stiff from the confined space, before making my way to the restrooms. Marcus yelled after me, still sporting that odd smile. "Take your time," he said. "We are not in any hurry." Austin and Nathan had also exited and were standing close to the front of the truck, talking quietly. One of them would look at me every few seconds and stifle a laugh. I ignored the usual shiver of uneasiness that I was experiencing. Perhaps they were only preparing one of their innocuous practical jokes. Perhaps they would lurk behind the structure and leap out to frighten me or leave something repulsive in my seat. I had previously suffered more from them. I spent a few extra minutes to spray cool water on my face and neck because the restroom was remarkably clean for such a distant place. It was already getting unbearably hot in the desert, and I was afraid to go back in that vehicle for a few more hours. My reflection in the mirror revealed a lady I hardly knew. The self-assured, driven individual who had previously envisioned earning her MBA and launching her own company had been replaced by someone who lived her days on eggshells, attempting to avoid making her husband and his brothers laugh at her next joke. How did I get so little? When had I given up retaliating? I reflected on the lady I once was, the summa cum laude who had earned a finance degree from Arizona State University. Marcus persuaded me to postpone enrolling in their MBA program, even though I had been accepted on a partial scholarship. "We need the income right now," he had once stated. "You can always go back to school later." Later never seemed to arrive, and that was 3 years ago. Instead, Marcus continued his accounting career while I worked part-time at a grocery shop, with the assurance that my moment would ultimately come. His siblings conveniently forgot that I had put my dreams on wait in order to support my husband's aspirations, and never missed a chance to remind me that I was simply a college dropout making minimum money. After drying my hands, I prepared to make the trip back to the truck. Perhaps if I just made it through this journey, everything will improve. Maybe Marcus would stop it when he finally realized how his brothers treated me. Perhaps I could finally bring up the subject of going back to school when we got home. I squinted against the intense desert heat as I made my way from the toilet to the parking lot. Other than the two other cars I had seen earlier, the parking lot was deserted. For a moment, I stood there in confusion, thinking I had somehow gotten turned around. But no, this was definitely where Marcus had parked. I could see the tire tracks in the sandy gravel, the discarded cigarette butt that Austin had flicked out the window, the small oil stain that marked the exact spot where the truck had been idling. They were gone. My heart began to race as I spun around, scanning the entire rest area for any sign of the familiar blue pickup truck. Maybe they had moved to a different parking spot. Maybe they were just playing a prank and would come driving back any second, laughing at my panic. But as the minutes ticked by and the desert silence pressed in around me, the horrible truth began to sink in. They had left me here, 315 miles from home, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back and my small purse. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. No signal. Of course, there was no signal. This was exactly the kind of place where cell towers were a luxury that nobody had bothered to install. I ran to the edge of the parking area, hoping to catch a glimpse of tail lights disappearing down the highway, but there was nothing except endless asphalt stretching toward the horizon. Heat waves distorted the distant landscape into an abstract painting of beige and brown. The temperature had to be approaching 100 degrees already, and it was not even noon yet. The two other vehicles in the lot belonged to truckers who were nowhere to be seen, probably asleep in their cabs during the heat of the day. I knocked on the doors anyway, desperate for help, but got no response. The rest area had a small visitor center, but when I tried the door, it was locked with a sign indicating limited hours of operation. I sank down onto a concrete bench in the shade of the building, trying to process what had just happened. This was not a prank. This was not one of their usual jokes that would be forgotten by tomorrow. This was something else entirely, something cruel and calculated that I never would have believed Marcus capable of just a few hours ago. In my purse, I found my wallet with exactly $23 in cash, a credit card that Marcus controlled, and an empty water bottle that I had drained during the first part of our journey. No phone signal, no transportation, no way to contact anyone for help. The nearest visible sign of civilization was a gas station that looked to be at least several miles away, shimmering in the distance like another mirage. As I sat there in the growing heat, watching the occasional car speed past without slowing down, I realized that my husband and his brothers had not just abandoned me in the desert. They had stripped away every illusion I had about my marriage, my worth, and my future. But they had also given me something else, something they never intended: the devastating clarity that comes when you finally see your life for what it really is. The sun climbed higher, and the concrete bench beneath me grew too hot to sit on comfortably. I moved to the small patch of shade provided by an overhang near the restrooms, but even there, the heat was becoming unbearable. My throat was already dry, and I rationed the few drops of water left in my bottle, knowing I might need them later. Every car that passed on the highway became a potential lifeline, but none of them slowed down. To them, I was just another rest stop visitor taking a break from driving. I tried to flag down several vehicles, waving my arms and stepping closer to the road, but the drivers either did not see me or chose to ignore my obvious distress. The professional-looking woman in the silver sedan actively avoided making eye contact. The family in the minivan with children pressed against the windows drove past without even acknowledging my presence. I began to understand why Marcus had chosen this particular rest stop. It was remote enough that help was not readily available, but not so isolated that my disappearance would immediately trigger a search and rescue operation. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became dangerous. I could feel my skin burning despite staying in the shade, and my head was beginning to pound from dehydration. The empty water bottle mocked me from where it sat on the ground nearby. I had been foolish to drain it so early in the journey, but I never imagined I would need to ration water for survival. That was when I heard the sound of a diesel engine slowing down, followed by the hiss of air brakes. A large semi-truck with Texas plates was pulling into the rest area, and I felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. I had heard enough horror stories about women accepting rides from strangers, but my situation was becoming desperate enough that I was willing to take the risk. The driver who climbed down from the cab was not what I had expected. He was probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His denim shirt was clean and pressed, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who spent most of his time alone on the road. "You okay, miss?" he asked, his voice carrying a gentle Texas drawl. "You look like you have been out here for a while." I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry that only a croak came out. He immediately reached into his truck and handed me a cold bottle of water from a small cooler. I drank it greedily, not caring how desperate I looked. "Easy there," he said. "You will make yourself sick drinking too fast in this heat. What happened to your ride?" When I finally managed to tell him my story, his expression changed from concern to anger. "They just left you here, your own husband?" He shook his head in disgust. "That is not a prank. That is criminal. You could die out here." His name was Samuel Rodriguez, and he owned a large ranch outside Fresno, California. He was on his way back from delivering a load of agricultural equipment to a farm in Nevada, and my rest stop was right on his route home. "I cannot in good conscience leave you here," he said. "But I understand if you do not want to accept a ride from a stranger. We can call the police when we get to the next town, and they can sort this whole mess out." The idea of involving the police terrified me more than accepting help from this seemingly kind stranger. What would I tell them? That my husband had abandoned me as a joke? How would I explain the years of psychological abuse that had led to this moment? How would I prove that this was intentional rather than some terrible misunderstanding? "I would be grateful for a ride," I said finally. "But I should probably call my husband first. Let him know I am okay." Samuel's expression darkened. "Miss, with all due respect, a man who would leave his wife in the desert is not someone you need to be checking in with." As Samuel's truck pulled away from the rest area, I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. I was escaping the immediate danger of the desert heat, but I was also making a choice that would change everything. There was no going back from this moment, no pretending that what Marcus had done was acceptable or forgivable. Samuel was a thoughtful traveling companion who seemed to understand that I needed time to process what had happened. He kept the truck's air conditioning running at full blast and handed me another bottle of water without being asked. The CB radio chattered occasionally with trucker chatter, but otherwise, we rode in comfortable silence as the desert landscape gradually gave way to more varied terrain. "I have been driving these roads for 30 years, Samuel said finally. "Seen all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, but what your husband did to you, that is not normal behavior. That is the kind of thing that escalates." His words sent a chill through me because I knew he was right. The pranks and jokes had been getting meaner over the past year, more personal and humiliating. Marcus had started involving his brothers more frequently, turning our home into a place where I was constantly on guard. I had told myself it was just immaturity, that he would outgrow it eventually. But abandoning me in the desert was not immaturity. It was cruelty with intent to cause real harm. "Do you have family you can stay with?" Samuel asked. "Somewhere safe to go while you figure out your next move?" I shook my head. My parents had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, and I had no siblings. Marcus's family was the only family I had left, and they clearly saw me as an outsider who could be discarded at will. The few friends I had made during college had drifted away over the years, partly because of distance and partly because Marcus had made it clear that he did not approve of my spending time with them. "What about work?" Samuel continued gently. "Do you have a job to go back to?" The question stung because it highlighted just how dependent I had become. My part-time position at the grocery store barely covered my personal expenses, and Marcus had made sure that all our major financial accounts were in his name only. I had access to one credit card, but it had a low limit, and he monitored every purchase. I had no savings, no independent income, and no real marketable skills beyond an unfinished college degree. I was studying finance before I got married, I said. I had planned to finish my MBA, maybe start my own investment consulting business someday, but that was a long time ago. Samuel glanced over at me with interest. Finance, huh? That is interesting. I could use someone with financial knowledge on my ranch. Been trying to expand the operation, maybe diversify into some new crops, but I do not know much about investment strategies or business planning. Been flying by the seat of my pants for 25 years. It was the first time in years that someone had expressed interest in my education or potential career prospects. Marcus had dismissed my business ideas as unrealistic fantasies, and his brothers had openly mocked my academic achievements. But this stranger was talking to me like I might actually have something valuable to contribute. I am probably pretty rusty, I said. It has been 3 years since I was in school. Knowledge like that does not just disappear, Samuel replied. And sometimes a fresh perspective is exactly what a business needs. Tell you what, you help me figure out some of this financial planning stuff, and I will make sure you have a place to stay while you get back on your feet. Fair trade. For the first time since watching Marcus drive away, I felt a glimmer of something that might have been hope. Samuel's ranch was unlike anything I had ever seen, sprawling across several thousand acres of California's Central Valley. It was a masterpiece of agricultural engineering, with irrigation systems, modern equipment, and fields of crops that stretched to the horizon. The main house was a large, comfortable adobe structure surrounded by shade trees and flowering gardens that seemed almost magical after the barren desert I had just escaped. This is incredible, I said as we pulled up the long gravel driveway. How long have you owned all this? Built it from nothing over the past 25 years, Samuel said with obvious pride. Started with just 80 acres and a used tractor, but I'm not getting any younger, and I want to make sure the place can support itself for the long term. That is where you come in if you are willing. He showed me to a small guest house behind the main residence, complete with its own kitchen, bathroom, and living area. It was modest but spotless, and after the events of the day, it felt like the most luxurious accommodation I could imagine. There was a phone on the kitchen counter, and Samuel gestured toward it. If you want to call your husband, let him know you are safe. That is your business, he said. But think carefully about what you want to say. Men like that, they have a way of talking women into giving them second chances they do not deserve. After Samuel left me alone, I stared at the phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to call Marcus immediately to scream at him about what he had done and demand an explanation, but a larger part of me was afraid of what I might hear. Would he laugh about it? Would he claim it was just a joke that went too far? Would he somehow manage to make it my fault for not being able to take a joke? Instead, I called my part-time supervisor at the grocery store and told her I would not be coming in anymore. It was the first time in years that I had made a unilateral decision about my employment without consulting Marcus first. The act of quitting felt both terrifying and liberating. That evening, Samuel brought over a stack of financial documents and spread them across the dining table in the guest house. I warned you I was flying by the seat of my pants, he said with a rueful smile. These are 3 years of tax returns, profit and loss statements, and some investment portfolios that my old accountant set up before he retired. I need someone to make sense of it all and tell me where I should be putting my money. As I began reviewing the documents, I felt my dormant analytical skills awakening like muscles that had been asleep for too long. Samuel's ranch was profitable, but not nearly as profitable as it could be. His investment portfolio was conservative to the point of being stagnant, and he was missing dozens of opportunities for tax advantages and business expansion that were practically glaring off the pages at me. You are sitting on a gold mine, I told him after 2 hours of review. But you are barely scratching the surface of what this operation could become. Samuel leaned back in his chair and studied me with a thoughtful expression. Show me, he said. I spent the next 3 hours outlining a comprehensive business plan that included crop diversification, strategic investments in agricultural technology, and a marketing strategy that would allow him to sell directly to high-end restaurants and organic food distributors. By the time we finished, Samuel was looking at me like I had just performed magic. Where did you learn all this? He asked. I told you, I said, feeling more confident than I had in years. I was studying finance. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom in the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, looking out at an audience of some of the most powerful investors in the world. My company, Desert Bloom Capital, had grown from a single client ranch to managing over $500 million in assets, specializing in sustainable agricultural investments that consistently outperformed the market by significant margins. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and confident, sustainable agriculture is not just the future of farming. It is the future of smart investing. The audience listened intently as I outlined the portfolio strategies that had made my clients wealthy while supporting environmentally responsible farming practices. In the 2 years since Samuel had found me walking along that desert highway, I had discovered a talent for financial analysis that surpassed anything I had imagined during my college years. My recommendations had helped Samuel expand his ranch into a multi-million-dollar operation, and word of my success had spread throughout California's agricultural community. Desert Bloom Capital now managed investment portfolios for ranch owners, organic food companies, and sustainable technology developers across 3 states. I had bought a mansion in Napa Valley, driven a Tesla, and been featured on the cover of Agricultural Investment Quarterly. The scared, abandoned woman who had been left at that rest stop no longer existed. The key to successful agricultural investing, I continued, is understanding that sustainability and profitability are not opposing forces. They are complementary strategies that create long-term value while protecting our natural resources. I was halfway through explaining a particularly successful investment in water conservation technology when a commotion erupted near the back of the ballroom. Security guards were trying to stop someone from entering the restricted conference area, but the person was pushing past them with determination. "Rebecca," a familiar voice shouted across the room. "This disappearing act ends now. You need to come home." The entire ballroom fell silent as Marcus pushed past the security guards and strode down the center aisle toward the stage. He looked older, thinner, and desperate in a way that would have once made me feel sorry for him. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was a wild look in his eyes that suggested he had been searching for me for a very long time. "You cannot just run away from your marriage," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I have been looking for you for 2 years. Do you have any idea what you have put me through?" I paused my presentation and looked down at him calmly, feeling the eyes of 300 influential investors watching this confrontation unfold. These were people who controlled billions of dollars in assets, who had flown in from around the world to hear my market analysis, and who were now witnessing my husband's public meltdown. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom, "I would like you to meet Marcus Collins. This is the man who abandoned me in the Barstow Desert 315 miles from home because he thought my dependence on him was amusing." The audience gasped audibly, and I could see several prominent investors exchanging shocked glances. Marcus' face went pale as he realized he had just interrupted a room full of some of the most powerful people in California's financial community. "You are embarrassing yourself," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Come home and stop this ridiculous gold digger charade." I had been working with billionaire investor James Whitfield for 6 months when he got up from his front row seat. With a tone full of contempt, he added, "Pardon me, but did you just call one of our most successful fund managers a gold digger?" When Marcus realized how big of a mistake he had made, the room erupted in angry muttering. He had security officers on either side of him, waiting for me to give the all-clear to get him off the property. I felt nothing except sympathy for the man who used to be in charge of every part of my existence, given how little he looked at the time. "Gentlemen," I instructed the security personnel, "please escort Mr. Collins from the building and make sure he understands that he is not welcome at any future events." I returned to my presentation slides and resumed where I had left off, as if nothing had occurred, while they escorted Marcus away while continuing to yell about his rights as my husband. The video of Marcus's rage went popular on social media within days of his public humiliation at the investment conference, and insiders in the financial world shared it as an illustration of toxic masculinity in action. After watching the video, Jennifer, Nathan's wife, filed for divorce right away, telling everyone she could not stay married to someone who could be so nasty. Ashley, Austin's girlfriend, officially ended their relationship by sharing a harsh Facebook breakup letter in which she expressed her disapproval of males who ditch women for amusement. After the tale made it to local news channels, their parents, Frank and Carol, were forced to quit their Phoenix church membership. They finally moved to a tiny hamlet in Oregon where no one recognized their family name. When their bosses saw the viral video, all three brothers lost their jobs, and once their identities were linked to the controversy, no California financial institution would hire any of them. Within 48 hours after the conference event, Marcus lost his job at his accounting business, and the three brothers were placed on a blacklist in their entire sector. As legal bills from many litigation, including a civil action I brought for emotional anguish and desertion, piled up, they all declared bankruptcy within 2 years. Eventually, their image grew so tainted that even basic work became almost impossible in their home state, forcing them to accept minimum wage positions under false pretenses in other states. I thought about how their cruel abandonment had unintentionally compelled me to uncover a financial genius I never knew existed within myself as I rang the opening bell for Desert Bloom Capital's most recent fund launch at the New York Stock Exchange and watched financial reporters document the moment for the evening news. The worst thing that can happen to you can sometimes serve as the impetus for the finest thing that might have occurred. And I was thankful every day that Marcus had been so stupid as to reveal his true self to me before I wasted any more years attempting to win his approval.